This week's portion is called Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness, but it's known in English by the name of Numbers, because, at least on the surface of the text, its story begins with numbers. In the beginning of Numbers, God commands us to take a census of all the children of Israel. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe, and God spoke unto Moses, Bamidbar Sinai, in the wilderness of Sinai, Ba'ohel Moed, out of the tent of meeting, Be'echad l'chodesh, on the first day of the month, Hasheni, the second month, B'shnat Hashenit, in the second year, let's say Tam Mitzrayim, from the Exodus of Egypt. Lemor, saying, Su'u et rosh kol adat b'nei Yisrael, raise up the heads of all the households of Israel, lemishpachotam, among their families, leveit avotam, and their ancestral houses, b'mispar shemot kol zachar legugulotam, take a census of all the souls in every generation. Mi ben esrim shana, from those who are 20 years and older, v'mala, v'kol yotzei tzava b'Yisrael, all those who can go forth in defense of the people of Israel. Tifkadu otam, you shall number them, letzivotam, among their hosts, atav Aharon, you and Aaron, etchem, he will be with you. Yihyu ish lamateh, and with you shall be a person of every tribe, ish rosh levet avotav, a person who is the head of every one of their ancestral households, who va'ele shemot ha'anashim. These are the names of the people who will come forth. Asher ya'amdu itchem, those who will stand with you, Reuven, from the tribe of Reuven, Elitzur ben Shteur, Elitzur the son of Shteur. L'Shimon, from the tribe of Simeon, Shlumiel ben Tsurishadai, Shlumiel the son of Tsurishadai. Yehudah, from the house of Judah, Nachshon ben Aminadav, Nachshon the son of Aminadav. Count the number of all the children of Israel by clans and their ancestral households, listing the names every male head by head. You and Aaron shall record them by their groups, from the age of 20 years and up, all those in Israel who are able to bear arms. Now, setting aside the whole issue of how historically accurate this census might be, there's something more interesting going on beneath the numbers. When the census is complete in Numbers chapter 1, verse 46, we're told, and all those who were numbered came to 603,550. If that number sounds familiar, it should. This is the source of the idea that there were 600,000 people who stood at Mount Sinai in order to receive the Ten Commandments. Back in Exodus chapter 38, verse 26, the previous census comes up with exactly the same number of 603,550. Wow, what a coincidence. Wait, there's more. According to tradition, when one counts up all the letters in the Torah, guess what? There are 603,550 letters. A year has passed, and not a single soul has perished. Not a single child has been born. Or even more inconceivably, people have died and children have been born, and yet somehow we've arrived a year later with exactly the same number in all. It's impossible for us to know how the census numbers reflect reality. More likely, these numbers are more typological than actual in their nature. But there's a lesson here for us to learn, courtesy of the early Hasidic master, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. He said that just as a Torah scroll missing even one letter is unusable, so is the Jewish people. Should even one Jew fall away? Here's the lesson of the value of one. There are, by the way, actually 304,805 letters in the Torah, in a Torah scroll. I haven't counted them all individually, but I have a computer that did so. That might ruin the story a little bit, I know, but it demonstrates nonetheless that these numbers, they're not really numbers exactly. They're meant to tell a story. Which raises a larger and more important question. Who are we counting exactly? While God instructs us to take a census of the whole community, and in many cases the term children of Israel is understood to mean both men and women, this is decidedly not what it means here. The text makes it abundantly clear that the census should include only men over the age of 20 who are capable of bearing arms, because men of military age will be counted on to defend the entire community against the danger and against the perilous trek which lies ahead. Only the men get counted. But how then do we account for the hidden numbers that this census overlooks? The roughly 600,000 women, or what must have been at least 2 million children, or the 100,000 or so elderly men, and some 90,000 men whose physical challenges made them unable to bear arms, all of whom lived alongside the 603,550 children of Israel who were officially numbered. All told, that adds up to about 3.4 million people who are standing together at Sinai, but only the men of military age are being counted. This matters. Counting matters, because it affects the way we recount the story, this story, which is a foundational story of our people. When you consider that these 603,550 men are counted multiple times in the book, in a book that only has 36 chapters in it at all, a book which in that same time mentions fewer than 10 women, you begin to understand that who does the counting and who gets counted are not inconsequential matters. Add to this the cumulative effect of hearing these numbers repeated year in and year out to every generation of the Jewish people during our annual reading of the Torah, like today, the impact of hearing the stories of our people again and again that all but exclusively feature only men in the stories, which we all help to make, is exponential. It's incalculable. It's overwhelming. So why weren't women counted? Well, I suppose we could go back to the excuse that the purpose of the census was to determine the size of the army that we could muster and the amount of taxes that we could raise. But that's not an answer to the question. It's simply an opening to a deeper question. Why are war and taxes the only things that we need to count? These are not the only existential questions which the children of Israel needed to answer before embarking on their journey through the wilderness to the Promised Land. Imagine for a moment that there were actually 603,550 men capable of bearing arms, but there were only 60,000 women capable of bearing children. How is that not even a greater existential threat for a people about to endure hardship of a journey across a desert? And since we know the story of this journey, how we fought our way finally to reach the Promised Land, only to have these same 600,000 men-at-arms refuse to cross the Jordan because they had lost faith in God and their ability to fight for our future, how we were forced to wander in the desert for 40 years until a new generation would rise, ready to take on those challenges, wouldn't it have been better to count the children among the children of Israel, because they are the generation who would actually conquer and inherit the land? And while I'm asking, shouldn't we be counting our elders, including people like Miriam and Moses and Aaron, without whose heroism and leadership we would have never reached this day of counting? Should we discount the generation who endured slavery and kept their faith, who mustered courage to set forth on this path that would eventually lead to our freedom? And even to the degree that our elders may no longer have the strength to lead us in battle or bear our children or provide for us a future in the next generation, oughtn't we be counting all those who will need our care, just as much as those who might be providing that care in every age? If God commanded us to count and number Kol Adat B'nai Yisrael, all the community of children of Israel, shouldn't we be counting everyone? Aren't we counting on everyone to get us to the Promised Land? But just as this question raises up from the Torah, so too lies an answer hidden within the text, because a more careful reading will reveal that in this census, we did more than simply count the numbers. We recounted the names as well. In conducting this census, Moses and Aaron are commanded to take with them ish lemateh, ish rosh levet avotav, a person from each tribe of Israel, a person from each ancestral house. And if that sentence sounds familiar, it ought to, because you've heard it before. Here, let me show you in the text. Most people know that the Torah is written without vowels. Just the consonants you see here are provided for us to read. But as you can see, the Torah has no punctuation marks either. No commas, no periods, no question marks. So when the Torah intends to emphasize a word or to make a point, it can't just place an exclamation point at the end of the sentence. The Torah speaks with its words alone. And doubling a word like it's doubled here, ish, ish, that means that word is important. Tripling a word, ish, 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 that practically screams out, this is important. What then are we to learn by drawing our attention to this word for an individual person, amidst a text which describes the counting of hundreds of thousands of people? It's a reminder that all the children of Israel, all that we are, cannot be summed up by a list of numbers alone. Each one of these numbers has a name, a soul, and a family who loves them, a personality of their own, and a promise for the future which only they can achieve. The only number that truly matters in the book of Numbers is the number 1. And that 1 is not a number, it's a name. Here. Look at this name. The last name I read as we were going through the text, Nachshon ben Aminadav. Consider that one name and the difference that one name can make. For if it were not for Nachshon, none of us would have reached the promised land. According to the Midrash, the legends of our people, it was Nachshon who stepped first into the sea, whether out of faith in God or in the certainty that he would never again be a slave to Pharaoh. Nachshon began to wade into the waters, and the people of Israel followed him. Only after he had made the first step were we brought forth to freedom. Without Nachshon, our story might have ended there, carried back to slavery by Pharaoh's army, never to reach the promised land. When the people of Israel cried out for help as Pharaoh's army descended upon them, when Moses called out to God and God called out to Moses, asking, pleading to do something to save our people, Nachshon set his feet into the waters, and the people of Israel began to cross the sea. And it was only then that God said to Moses, raise your staff and separate the waters. It was only after Nachshon had taken that first step. Each one in the book of Numbers is a story like Nachshon. Each soul has the ability to change the world. On this Memorial Day weekend, as the number of souls lost to coronavirus in our nation passes the unimaginable number of 100,000, we need to learn again how to count one soul at a time. As the Talmud teaches us, to destroy one soul is to destroy an entire world. To save one soul is to save the world entire. May we recognize the image of God in everyone we meet, so that we might be one, just as God is one.